Number 8. Amie Harwick. Early on the morning of February 15, 2020, Amie Harwick, a prominent marriage and sex therapist in the Los Angeles area, had just gotten home after a fun evening out with friends. Little did she know that her ex-boyfriend, Gareth Pursehouse, would be there waiting for her. Gareth threw her off a third-floor balcony, and when police officers found her on the ground 20 feet or just 6 meters below, she was barely breathing. And soon, she wasn't at all. After a thorough autopsy, the authorities decided the cause of death was blunt force injuries to her head and torso. There was also evidence of strangulation. The police also found a syringe laced with nicotine, a lethal poison in high doses, on Amie's balcony, which showed that Pursehouse intended to murder her. According to friends, Amie and Gareth dated sometime in the mid to late 2000s, and her friends always sensed something was wrong. One of them would later say that she never saw them together while they dated, and she wondered if he was keeping her away from her friends and isolating her. And it's not like Amie didn't see Gareth as a threat, though, too. Reportedly, she had already filed 2 restraining orders against him. The first was in 2011, and the other was in 2012. In April 2011, Amie wrote that her ex had forced her to the ground and covered her mouth to stop her from yelling. A month later, she again claimed that Gareth had physically abused her many times during arguments. This included choking her, suffocating her, pushing her against walls, and even slamming her head forcefully to the ground. He didn't take their breakup well and would often stalk and break into their home. Gareth also left multiple derogatory comments about her on posts online. They crossed paths again during an adult film industry awards event in January 2020. Reportedly, Pursehouse confronted her and was yelling in her face. He told her that she ruined his life. So it's no wonder pretty much everyone knew that her ex-boyfriend was the culprit when Amie was killed. He was soon arrested and is still in prison awaiting trial on multiple charges including first-degree murder and residential burglary. Number 7. KAYLA Ann Denham. On June 15, 2017, 24-year-old KAYLA Ann Denham was scheduled to meet up with a client, Christopher Landry, at 5 a.m. at his home. Before the appointment, as a safety precaution, she told her boyfriend the time and location of the house call. And a little while later, her friends and family started to really worry. She didn't come home on time and calls to her cell phone went unanswered. That's when they decided to call the police, who began searching. Her boyfriend also visited the client's property twice, and the second time, he found her car parked further away in the woods. Soon after, the cops found her lifeless body in Landry's barn. He was arrested on suspicion of killing his own therapist and charged with second-degree murder as well as obstruction of justice. His bail was set at a whopping $250,000. Landry would later admit to detectives that he had struck her in the head with a golf club 5 times, but an autopsy report revealed she had actually been hit 15 times and strangled 2 on top of that. His lawyers claimed he did this after she tried to steal his gaming console and computer bag, but they were unable to present any evidence to back these claims. Unsurprisingly, Christopher Landry was convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to life in prison for killing his therapist. Number 6. Jennifer Ann Hall. This story goes way back to 2002. Jennifer Hall was a respiratory therapist working at the Missouri Hedrick Medical Center. During the 5 months she worked there, 9 patients suffered from cardiac arrest while under her watch. 20 years later, she was arrested and charged with first-degree murder for only one of those deaths. Allegedly, Hall intentionally killed 75-year-old Fern Franco by administering unprescribed morphine and succinylcholine to him in a vulnerable state. 3 days after the incident, she was put on leave by the hospital. The reason she was suspected was because the hospital experienced 18 code blue incidents that year alone, which was an alarming increase for a hospital that historically averaged just 1 a year. And after Hall left, the code blue incidents went back to their normal amount. Months later, she was fired, but not because of the deaths. It was actually because hospital officials learned she had been convicted of committing arson at another small Missouri hospital. She spent a year behind bars before being acquitted of the crime in a retrial. After her recent arrest in May 2022, Hall pleaded not guilty and denied all allegations against her. She is currently in prison and her trial is set to take place soon. Her defense argues that she never had access to the drugs given to the dead patients and that she's being treated as a scapegoat for the hospital because of the arson incident. What do you make of this case? Tell us in the comments below and hit that subscribe button while you're at it. Number 5. Anthony Todd. On January 13, 2020, FBI agents knocked at the door of a physical therapist named Anthony Todd in the picture-perfect community of Celebration. They did this in order to give him a federal warrant for healthcare fraud charges that stemmed from his physical therapy business. But when they went inside, they saw something extremely disturbing. Todd was living inside his home alongside the decomposing bodies of his wife and 3 children. Even their dog Breezy had been murdered. The youngest, 4-year-old Zoe, was suffocated to death while the others had all been stabbed multiple times. Their dead bodies were covered with blankets and thrown in the master bedroom. Officials immediately arrested and charged Anthony with 4 counts of first-degree murder and 1 count of animal cruelty. Todd, also known as the Disney Dad, denied the charges, claiming that he wasn't present the night his family died. He said that his wife killed all the kids and then killed herself, which left him completely unsure of what to do. But in another conversation, he completely contradicted this statement. He told investigators that he and his wife decided to kill the children and themselves because she had been watching videos on how to achieve so-called salvation. They were apparently worried that the apocalypse was coming up. In 2022, a jury found Anthony guilty of all charges and sentenced him to 4 life sentences without any possibility of parole. It still isn't known what exactly his motivation was. The salvation story doesn't add up, but prosecutors claim that he just wanted control over the lives of his kids and his wife, pointing out that he had often used his family's phones to send text messages to their relatives. Number 4. CONNELL Watkins. Candace was born in Lincolnton, North Carolina, but at a young age she and her siblings were taken from their home and separated after being victims of neglect. At 5 years old, her parents' rights were terminated, and 2 years later she was adopted by Jean Elizabeth Newmaker, a pediatric nurse practitioner from Durham. Within months, Candace was taken to see a psychiatrist because of her poor behavior at home and was even given medication. Still, apparently she got worse throughout the next few years, and at one point she even killed her pet goldfish. So Jeannie took her to CONNELL Watkins, an unlicensed psychologist in the local area, after a glowing referral from William Goebel, a licensed doctor. She gave him $7,000 for a 2-week intense therapy session that included a rebirth with the help of Watkins and Julie Ponder, a California therapist. The therapist curled Candace into the fetal position inside a flannel sheet and pushed her against from all 4 sides. She begged them to stop, saying she was in pain. She cried out, gasping for air, telling them that she was dying. Ponder then told her to, quote, "Go ahead and die for real." She said she was going to throw up, but they kept going. After a while, the child stopped struggling, and when they opened up the sheet to look, she was unconscious and in fact had vomited. She died the next day at Children's Hospital. Watkins and Ponder were tried and convicted of reckless child abuse leading to death and were given 6-year prison sentences each. Newmaker pled guilty to neglect and abuse charges and received a 4-year suspended sentence, after which the charges were removed from her record entirely. What the doctors were even trying to accomplish through the deranged actions is anyone's guess. The sad reality, though, is that a child lost their life. Number 3. Mark Lawrence. On July 21, 2011, Dr. Mark Lawrence was having lunch with his close colleague Melvin Stern. Mark confided in his friend that he was extremely concerned about one of his patients. She was getting more and more paranoid as the days went on, and she even started blaming her problems on Lawrence, a 71-year-old psychiatrist. Stern advised him to refer the patient to another doctor, and Mark agreed that was the best course of action. But sadly, it was too late. Just 1 day later, Mark was dead. He had stepped out of his home office to tell his patient he needed a few minutes to finish up an earlier appointment. When he went back upstairs, the patient, 62-year-old Barbara Newman, pointed a gun at the doctor and shot him multiple times. He fell to the floor dead. She stepped out on the porch and turned the gun on herself and also died on the spot. The culprit was a former scientist at the National Institute of Immunology lab, and although she had been working in recent years, her neighbors expressed that she didn't really seem to be all that troubled, which is why they were just as shocked as anyone else after the incident. As for the victim, everyone around him had nothing but good things to say. He was one of the star psychotherapists in Virginia State and was doing many important things for the people in his community. Not much is known about Newman's motivations to murder someone who was just trying to help her, but there have been several reports saying that she was suffering from multiple illnesses. This was her way of escaping her problems for good. Number 2. Wayne S. Fenton. Wayne Fenton was one of the biggest names in psychotherapy. He served as the Associate Director of the National Institute of Mental Health and ran a private practice in Bethesda to treat severely mentally ill patients. But sadly, it was his work that caused his death. In September 2006, he was murdered by a patient, 19-year-old Vitaly A. Davizrov, in the middle of an appointment. According to the suspect's father, Vitaly had severe schizophrenia, and any discussions with him about taking medications resulted in an angry reaction. When the father brought his son to a session, Fenton told him he was going to encourage Vitaly to take the medication again. He also said that if given the chance, he would ask the patient to accept an injection rather than taking it orally to see if that would help more or not. For unknown reasons, Vitaly got agitated and beat his doctor with his fists, and when he left the office, Fenton was left on the ground bleeding from the face. When his father returned to get Vitaly, he noticed blood on his son's hands, pants, and shirt, and immediately called 911. Paramedics quickly arrived at the scene and found Fenton lying unresponsive inside the rear office. The teenager soon confessed to the crime and was taken into custody. He was found guilty in court but wasn't held criminally responsible because of his mental condition. So instead of prison, he was sent to a maximum security psychiatric hospital in Meriden. 4 years later, he killed someone again. This time, the victim was his roommate, David Rico Noyoya. Due to his growing paranoia and schizophrenia, Vitaly was found not competent enough to stand trial. Number 1. ACHUTHA Reddy. On September 13, 2017, Dr. ACHUTHA Reddy was stabbed 165 times, beaten, and run over by a car outside his clinic in Wichita, Kansas. An employee of the clinic heard Reddy calling for help and then saw one of his patients, 21-year-old Omar Dutt, stabbing the psychiatrist. She immediately separated the two, and Reddy ran out the back of the building with Dutt following behind him. He finally caught up to the doctor and repeatedly stabbed him to death. After that, he ran Reddy over with his car. A few hours later, authorities found the doctor's dead body lying in a nearby alley. Dutt was taken into custody and his vehicle was searched. Police found a baseball bat in the back seat of his car, a pocket knife, and a shirt soaked in blood. Even the tires had the victim's blood stains on them. ACHUTHA's wife, Dr. Beanie Reddy, stated that she couldn't sleep for years after her husband's death, and she would shake in fear at night thinking about it. It's still unclear why Omar committed this horrific crime. In 2021, he pleaded guilty to the murder and was sentenced to life in prison. He won't be eligible for parole until he serves out 25 years. Because Omar had a long history of dealing with mental illnesses, the judge recommended that he serve his sentence at Larned Correctional Mental Health Facility instead of a prison. Thanks for watching. Did you ever think therapy could go this wrong? Tell us in the comments below, and don't forget to subscribe. See you next time on The Bad Badger.